What does that mean? That means the understanding of the Salaf, i.e. their ijma', their consensus. Because the opinion of one of the Salaf is not a source of law if others disagree with him. If others from the Salaf disagree with each other. If two of the Sahaba disagree, their statement is not a source of law. But if all the Sahaba agree, then it's a source of law. Right? Or we said following the Salaf means following their methods of understanding the Quran and Sunnah. So ijma' is very important. Some people avoid ijma'. When they want to come up with a fatwa, they avoid ijma'. And they say, you know what? Often people will say there's ijma' on this issue, then we research it, and in fact there is no ijma'. Scholars differed in it. We say, yes, this is true. Sometimes people will claim there's ijma', and then you do more research, you find out there is no ijma'. However, sometimes people will say a hadith is sahih. Then you do more research and you find out it's not sahih. Does that mean the sunnah is not important? Of course not. Right? So ijma' is important, even if sometimes people say there is ijma' when there isn't in fact. How do we know of ijma'? Of course, when it's relayed by the scholars, like Ibn al-Mundhir, who has a book on ijma', Ibn Qudama has a book on ijma', or the early scholars of the madhab relayed ijma'. For us, this is the way that we know that there is ijma', but ijma' has conditions. So, let me give you an example first. Let's talk about the issue of riba. What is the ruling of the issue of riba? It's haram. Who said this? Who said that it's haram? No, we'll say the scholars of the ummah. Okay? What is it that they're relying upon? What is the scripture they're relying upon? The Quran, right? The verse in the Quran. What is the way of transmitting this ruling? Was it that some of them said it was haram and the rest were silent? Or did all of them say it was haram? All of them said it was haram. So now we've covered basically all of the pillars of ijma'. Right? I'm just giving you that as an example. Think about. So the first pillar is al-majmu'un, the group. Who are the people making this consensus? Who are the people conceding or making this consensus? The first condition of the group of people making ijma' is that they are people of ijtihad. People of ijtihad. So that means it's not you and me. Right? And sometimes this is important. And sometimes people will say, you know, there's ijma' of the scholars, there's ijma' of the ummah on this topic. And then somebody will say, but Muslims have always done this thing. Right? So for instance, somebody will say there's a ijma' against riba. They'll say, but even Muslims, I found a book in history that told me that Muslims in this country were doing riba. So it doesn't matter. I mean, the layperson is not involved in establishing ijma'. Right? We say, the scholars of the ummah say homosexuality is prohibited. They say, well, I found a poetry from the 13th century of someone writing homosexual poetry. So what? Ijma' is the people of ijtihad. It's not Tom, Dick, and Harry. It's not me and you. It's not the average person. It's the scholars. And when we say people of ijtihad, this is actually more specific than even saying the scholars. Why? Because somebody could be a scholar of nahw and sarf. Somebody can be a scholar of grammar. Is he from the people of ijtihad? No. Az-Zamakhshari is one of the most famous scholars of grammar. Almost every book of tafsir mentions Az-Zamakhshari. But nobody mentions Az-Zamakhshari when it comes to aqeedah, creed, when it comes to fiqh. Why? Who knows? It's from the Mu'tazila. His aqeedah was problematic. But his knowledge of Arabic grammar was maybe the best of all the scholars. Right? But this goes beyond that. Maybe there's a scholar of hadith, and he's a great scholar of hadith, but he is not an expert in usul, he's not an expert in fiqh, he's not an expert in istinbat and making fatawa. Right? So he's an expert in hadith. We want to know if this hadith is sahih. We have to go to him, but he's not an expert of ijtihad. He's not one of the people of ijtihad. So when we say the people of ijtihad, we're not just saying the scholars, we're saying specific category of scholars. The ones who have the ability to make ijtihad. This is number one. For people of ijtihad. So we have a whole section at the very end about ijtihad. I'm going to talk about it. Overall, that they understand the usul, they have great knowledge of fiqh, and that they have a deep knowledge of the Quran and Sunnah. So if you can study all the usul you want, if you have a very rudimentary understanding of the sunnah, you know very little ahadith, then you don't have the data to use the method. You need to have the method, and you also need the data. The data is the Quran and Sunnah, right? But we'll talk about ijtihad inshallah in more detail later on. The second condition is that they are contemporaries, that they live in one age. So let's say all of the Sahaba agreed on something. Is that ijma' for the rest of the ummah? Somebody will come and say, the Sahaba were only a small group of people. There's going to be billions of Muslims to come afterwards. Why should the opinion of the Sahaba, shouldn't we wait until more people come and then we say this is ijma'? Say no. Once the entire contemporary age, that the people living in that time, once they all agree, all the people of ijtihad of that time, once they all agree, that's the condition of ijtihad. So once all the Sahaba agreed on something and they were people of ijtihad, now it's established till the Day of Judgment. Then the final condition is that they all agree. They all agree. So if there are 100 scholars in a particular age and all of them agree on an issue, that's it. This becomes an ijma' and nobody can break it until the Day of Judgment. Now let's say there's 100 scholars in an era and 99 of them agree on the issue and one of them disagrees. Is that ijma' or not? No. There's actually a difference of opinion on this. Some people call it ijma' al-akthar. They say it's the ijma' of the majority. However, this is interesting if you think about it. So there's most scholars will say it is not ijma' until all of them agree. Okay, that's number one, majority. Minority will say if the majority agree but a small portion disagree, then it's still ijma'. Okay? But here's the problem. If you say that the agreement of most scholars is a source of law, but most scholars say that it's not ijma' unless all of them agree, then you're stuck in a circle, right? So this is the problem with that. So if we were to accept their opinion, we have to break their opinion, basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. The army of Usama ibn Zayd. Yes, it's a good example.
That was the decision of basically Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Yes.
He died. Yeah.
Yes.
So Abu Bakr honored that decision and
exactly. But he's saying almost everyone disagreed. He was the minority. So could we say he broke ijma'? No, we can't say he broke ijma'. Because ijma' is when everybody agrees. Right? Yeah. In today's day and age, can we make ijma'? Yes, we can. Yes, we can. But there are more conditions we're going to talk about that for us to understand. So, there's a few of these issues, by the way, that are circular. Like, for example, one person wrote a book. He said, anybody who brings an opinion outside of the four madahib has done haram. This is his book. And he took the book to a scholar. And then the scholar asked him, did any of the scholars of the four madahib say this opinion? He said, no. He said, for me to accept your book, I have to reject your book. Right? It's circular. Okay, so this is the conditions of the group. Now the inception is not the greatest translation here. But what I mean by it is the issue. So when we gave the previous example of riba, the issue is riba. The inception of the issue is riba, right? The group are the scholars. The ruling is that it's haram. You understand? Okay. So the issue has to have two conditions. The first condition is that there is no prior consensus. There's no previous ijma'. And the second is that there is no existing disagreement. So an example. Let's say there's an issue which the scholars disagree on the issue, and there's two opinions. And then over time, so let me give you an example. The woman wearing niqab, is this fard? The scholars of the Salaf disagreed on this. Maybe it was 50-50. Maybe even it was 60% said that it's wajib to wear the niqab and 40% said it's not. Over time, what happened today, almost all the scholars, with small exception, will say that niqab is mustahab and not fard. Can we now say, let's pretend 100% of the scholars today say niqab is mustahab and not fard. Can we now say there's ijma'? This is your question, right? Kind of. Yeah. Yes? If it's 100% of them?
What's the evidence?
Sorry?
What's the evidence now? They can just say, yeah, the way we see it right now is
No, because the difference is, if we say there's a jama'ah, then nobody can come with another opinion afterwards. You understand? Yeah.
You say that they have the
Yes, so if in the very beginning of Islam, when the issue of niqab came up, if 100% of them agreed on opinion, then it would have been ijma'. But because there's a previous disagreement, there's no previous ijma', it cannot be established afterwards.
Yeah, but the ijma' by itself has to be based on something. It's like
Yes.
You can just say
For sure.
ijma' itself has to have something supporting.
For sure, but each side has evidences.
Yeah, so like if there is already evidence that it's suitable, you can say, oh, we saw away this evidence and now we decided.
Yes.
So I guess you could say that it's not today, only on new issues that are not.
Exactly. So for us to today have a new ijma', it has to be on an issue of which there was no previous ijma'. They didn't agree on something in the past. If they agreed on something in the past, there was a ijma' before, and we come up with a new opinion, then we're committing haram. So for instance, if the scholars made ijma' that riba is haram, and then today we say, you know what, let's make riba halal. Things are too difficult, let's make it halal. Then we're committing haram, right? Because we cannot establish an ijma' when there's a previous ijma' that exists. And we cannot establish ijma' when there's a previous disagreement that exists. It has to be something new. So if there's something new that came, let's say Bitcoin, for example, didn't exist before. Now, of course, everybody disagrees on it. But assuming when Bitcoin came, let's say everybody agreed on it, whether they all agreed it's halal or they all agreed it's haram, whatever. Assuming everybody agreed on it, then it would become ijma'. No. If there's an issue that came in the past and they disagreed, khalas, there's an established disagreement. Sorry? Even one person. Okay.
I guess in the modern ijma', like for example, Ahmadiyya Muslims,
Mm-hmm.
the ijma' of the monks,
Yeah, something like that.
it's a new sect.
It's a new group, it's new beliefs, and then all the scholars agree on it. Yeah, that would be a term. Okay, so I keep losing myself. The ruling is that it has to be related to a binding Islamic ruling. So what do we mean by that? Let's say all the scholars, this could happen in some countries, they agree that Hondas are better than Fords. All of the ulama agree about this. Can we say there's a ijma'? No, because it's not related to an Islamic ruling. It has to be an Islamic ruling. The fourth pillar is a sigha. What is the form of the ijma'? And there's three types of forms of ijma'. There is ijma' sarih, the explicit. There is sukuti, the silent. And there is murakkab min khilaf, there is that which is compounded by difference. The first explicit, let's say all the scholars agreed in a gathering. All the scholars came together. Let's say there's 100 scholars of ijtihad alive today. They all came together and they said, this issue is halal or this issue is haram. And they all signed. They all said, we sign on this. We all agreed on this. This would be ijma' sarih. It is a clear, explicit ijma' because they all said, this is our opinion. The second is sukuti. Let's say there's 100 scholars of ijtihad alive today. Let's say 20 of them gathered together and they said, you know what, we looked into this issue and we all believe that this is haram, whatever the issue might be. And they all signed it, 20. But there's 80 who didn't attend. However, the 80 did not say anything. And the statement that the 20 made became well known, became popularized. Everybody knows about it. And the 80 didn't say anything. Then we would say this is ijma'.
أشهد